Hello everyone, and welcome back to another board game review video. In this episode we're actually going to do two board games. I just recently discovered them this past November, and they're both by the same company too. One's kind of a follow-up to the other, so we're going to go ahead and review both of them at the same time and take a look on them. Both of them are they were produced, I should say, by the Avalon Hill company. They're well known since 1952, I believe it was, for war games and other strategy type board games. They're, I believe, now owned by Hasbro, but they've been around for a while, making pretty lot of well-known strategy type board games. One of the recent ones that they've got under their name right now, according to their website last time I looked, was Axis and Allies, which is basically like a World War II simulation type board game. So, but the games we're going to be looking at are railroad themed board games. The first is from 1958, and that is the game Dispatcher. And the follow-up to that was the 1969 game C&O B&O. The games are similar, yet they're different, and we'll go ahead and examine both of these and take a look and see how well they're made, and if there are similarities and differences between the two. So with that, all aboard, let's go ahead and dive into the games. So starting out, we'll take a look at Dispatcher. Found this on eBay for $45. There were a few copies of it that were in newer condition, or a little bit better condition than this. Only thing was, a lot of the games were missing pieces, and one was even missing instructions. One eBay auction had the instructions, but the instructions they were wanting $40 for, which I'm not paying that much for a few pieces of paper. But found this one for $45. Box obviously has some wear on it. We'll go ahead and open it up. And bottom of the box, the corners are loose, but once you get the lid on, it all holds together. It comes with this initial sheet for when you open up the game, basically recommending the game not only to railroad enthusiasts, but those who like chess and checkers type games, regardless of age. It's a realistic, highly comprehensive railroad game that accurately simulates the challenging problems that face a railroad dispatcher of trains. No railroad skill or experience is needed. The only requirement is the player be an intelligent, thinking person who takes genuine enjoyment from challenging thought. Dispatcher is an all-skill game. And then it has the price down here at the bottom, $4.95 for what originally sold for, apparently. So first off is the game board, which we'll examine here in a moment. We then have 84 train markers, and I've got these divided up by which town they go to basically speed up the setup of the game. So three bunches of markers for each side of the board. There's also a set of 12 helper markers, which we'll explain here in a moment. There's 24 simulation cards, basically one for each round of the game. You have the original Dispatcher instruction booklet, supplement to the instructions, so basically a little leaflet here. You have 2 copies of train departures, scheduled train departures for the rounds of play for the game. And then you have 2 of each of these different schedules. basically trains coming from the one town on the east side of the board. A couple other copies of the schedule for trains coming from another east side town, trains from the west side, and another couple from the west side. There's basically 2 copies of each of these schedules. Although the main thing is the departure, or the departure sheet that I'll go over here in a moment. Then it's got this little like pamphlet thing from Avalon Hill. This is all the original paperwork and everything that came with the game, which I am amazed that for being a 63-year-old game, it's got all the original paperwork and everything, and then the basically survey postcard that you can mail in. This is when they were in Baltimore, Maryland, apparently, but but it's got all the pieces and everything. So let me get the game set up and we'll take a look at how it's played. Alright, so here's the initial setup of Dispatcher. The board, as you can see, where it folds, on 2 of the folds, the board is cracked, but it's still holding together very well. Cracking obviously due to age, but the board is in amazingly good condition for its age. There's no like fading or anything like that, or tears, marks, or anything like that. And as I said, all the game pieces are in place, or included. So basically the game starts out, or the game's laid out at like a real railroad system. It's a fictional railroad system, but basically it starts with the top left there with the town of Avalon. There's a double track line going down to Johnstown, and both lines have both towns have double track lines going east out of there to PA Tower, which is the entrance to Glen Yard. There's also a town of Damascus and town of Ellsberg. And moving across, there's a 3-track route that goes over the mountain, which we'll look at a little more closely here in a moment. And then there's a low-line route, a single-track route with some passing sidings. And then it gets over to the other side of the mountain, and the line splits up into 4 directions for a town of View, Taney, Branch, and then Seaside. And the route, the signaling, well, the way they call the signaling is a little off on the instructions. They have basically the routes where there's in between each block there's a line at the top of the dividing line. It's pointing, going in both directions, like showing on the screen right now. They call that centralized traffic control. And then if you go up to here, the top track, they call it automatic signaling. It's actually directional running on that track. Basically, if it's pointing to the right, that means that's the direction the traffic's going to be coming from on that track. It's signaled for direction from the traffic from that track. So basically, the top track would be coming from the right. Middle track would be able to go both ways, or signaled to go both ways, and then the bottom track signaled for a right hand, or to go eastbound to the right. Now you could run trains against the flow of traffic, but if there's another train already on that line and you let go of the piece, then it's considered causing a collision, which we'll go into here in a moment. The train markers, there are 3 types of trains that you'll have on the as you play the game. You have pink, which is your passenger trains. White is the Merchandise Express, which would be like high priority mail or intermodal trains. And then you have the blue, which is your general freights, which are basically like the mixed freights, coal drags, that kind of thing. Also, there are 12 what are called helper sets, or markers. 3 are initially set up at Glen Yard, or excuse me, 6 are set up at Glen Yard, and the other 6 are set up at the helper yard down at KD. So on the train markers, the smaller letters and numbers are the train numbers themselves. Passenger trains just have numbers. Merchandise Express have ME, and then the general freights have EF for extra freight, SF for symbol freight, or MF for mineral freight. The large bold letters on there, on the markers, those are the destinations, or 2-letter destinations for each train. So you basically can tell exactly where the train's heading. So VI would be View, SE Seaside, JO Johnstown, DA Damascus, and so on. If you see like where it has on EF 804, where it has SE-EL, it means the train's going to Seaside via EL. So basically, when the train leaves Avalon, it's going to get to VO Tower, and then it's going to detour down to Ellsberg, and then head on east, rejoining the original route over at PA. When the trains, basically the board is divided up into 2 sections. You have the Western Division, which is to the left of Glen Yard, and the red line down the middle there, the second panel. Then you have the Eastern Division, which is a little bit larger, has more trackage than the Western Division. Although, just because there's more trackage to this one doesn't make it any more complicated or anything than the original or the other half. They're both equally challenging to run. So each train has a certain number of spaces that it is required to make on each move on the board. Say all 4 of these trains, or 3 of these trains, came out of Johnstown. The pink passenger train would be, or red, it's red in the instructions, but looks pink here. But anyways, if the passenger trains are allowed to move 4 spaces, Merchandise Express, the white, are allowed to move 3 spaces, and then the general freights, blue, are allowed to move 2 spaces. If the trains are not able to make the full amount of spaces in one move, say for example the passenger train can only move 3 spaces, and that's it that it can move on for that particular turn. Even though it moved 3 spaces, you'll get deducted 4 points for the scoring. Same way with the Merchandise Extras, if it cannot move 3 spaces, you get deducted 3 points. General Freights, if it can't move 2 spaces, you get deducted 2 points. As you look around the board, the terminal areas for the towns, those are basically unlimited trackage in there. You can have as many trains in there, everything as you want. Same thing for here at Ellsberg, even though it shows single track lines, there's apparently like supposed to be a yard in there, so you can have mobile trains in there. At the interlockings, they have the interlockings all outlined. You can have multiple trains going through an interlocking, but you cannot have conflicting movements going through the interlocking. So if I have one train on the top track heading right to left, the only other move would be a train going from left to right on the bottom track, or possibly turning south towards Ellsberg on this one. As the trains move across the board, they are only allowed to move once per round. When they come to PA Tower here at Glen Yard, the pink passenger trains and the white Merchandise Express, those are allowed to pass through without going into Glen Yard. The blue general merchandise freight trains, those have to go into Glen Yard, and those get basically the westbounds get put in the westbound yard, eastbounds go into the eastbound yard, and that's where they're handed off to the next dispatcher. Whereas the passenger and merchandise express trains, those go straight across into the next territory, and at that point that train cannot be moved anymore during that round. But say the westbound dispatcher runs a passenger train over into the eastbound or eastern division. Once that train's been moved, the eastern dispatcher, if it's his turn next, for the second half of the round, he cannot move that train. He has to leave it there. Doesn't get any deduction or any points against him or anything, but basically, that train's already been moved, so you can't move it anymore for that particular round. Just east of Glen Yard and PA Tower, in this first section, where there's an arrow pointing down to it, that is where all the Merchandise Express and general freight trains, the blue, going across the 3-track over the mountain, they basically stop there to pick up their helpers that come out of Glen Yard. Basically, as soon as they get there, that train's done, and the helper can be added on, but that train's done for the rest of the that particular round of play. The helper marker is basically moved or put on top of the train marker, and then as the next time for the next round, basically the train then gets moved like it normally would over the mountain. And at the summit, the instructions say to take the train stop there to take the helpers off, which you can do, and then run the helpers light by themselves. Basically, the helpers can be moved 2 spaces per turn, and move those back down to the bottom of the hill for the next train. But you can also keep them on the train and just keep it moving down to the other end of the side of the mountain at KD, where the other helper yard is, and you can basically take the helpers off there. When I played this by myself not too long ago, after getting this game, that's actually what I did, was I kept the helpers on all the way across the mountain. That actually helped relieve congestion over on the 3 tracks, because it can get easily congested with trains and everything. Then that basically also allows helpers to be at both yards and stuff, because you can easily, once it's off the train at KD, the helpers go into the yard, and then you're going to have other trains coming westbound, and then route them back over to the west side. So for each round, basically you decide which dispatcher is going to go first, and then what you do is you flip over one of the situation cards. Like in this one, basically it's saying that the last train to leave HX Tower on the low line westbound is derailed and cannot be moved during this turn. So basically, if there's a train on this low line here, it's basically stopped, and that would mean that the east side dispatcher would incur a penalty for that train not being able to move. If there's no train on that route, no penalty, it doesn't apply then to the dispatcher. But these are basically just random situations that it throws in, like if a certain train's running on the board, then it has sticking brakes and cannot be moved. And as a result, whichever territory that train is in, it incurs, that dispatcher incurs the penalty for that one. So basically, after flipping the situation card to see if it applies to anything on the board, the first dispatcher, let's say the west side dispatcher, moves any trains on his territory, the required number of spaces. If the train's not able to move the full spaces, say like I mentioned before, the passenger trains, if it can't move, passenger train can't move 4 spaces, that dispatcher gets 4 points or demerits against them. Merchandise Express would be 3, and then General Freight would be 2. And then basically once that's done and those points are totaled up, the dispatcher would then consult the dispatcher pamphlet here, or leaflet here, and you can actually, it tells then what trains are scheduled to go out each round. The game starts at 8 o'clock in the morning, so basically each round it shows what trains are leaving when, or scheduled to leave when. These would be the passenger trains and then the Merchandise Express. If you're wondering what it means by like 8:15 or 8:30, based on the since each round is like 1 hour, basically first round is 8 o'clock or 8 a.m. and then the second round is 9 a.m. Because the passenger trains move at 4 spaces, each space represents 15 minutes. So basically, train 1 leaving View would be leaving at 8 o'clock and it would move 4 spaces. Train 5 leaving View, leaving at 8:15, it would only be moving 3 spaces because it would only have the 3/4 of an hour to move during that hour. Likewise, train 17 would be leaving at 8:30, so it would only be moving 2 spaces. So then once the dispatcher has moved their scheduled trains out onto the main line to get underway, at that point is when you can move your blue extra freights. And this is where the strategy part really comes into the game, because you have to look ahead as to what trains, what scheduled trains are going to be coming out from which town on your territory and at what time. The reason that's critical is because if you get when the blue freight's in front of the passenger train, blue freight's can only move 2 spaces, and the pink or red passenger trains are allowed to move 4 spaces, which would be twice as fast. So if you get a passenger train behind a freight train and it's stuck behind your freight train, or that freight train, during the whole round or each round, then each round you're going to get 4 points added to your score, or deducted or scored against you for each round, which is going to add up quite a bit. And so basically, if you're going to incur any kind of train delays, you want it to be the blue freight trains. You don't want it to be the higher priority trains, because those add up really quick. Also, at the end of the round, after you finished all of your moves, basically you get 1 point deducted against you for any train that has not left its original terminal. So if say these 3 trains down here at Johnstown that have left Johnstown are the only 3 that I've moved, all the other blue in these other 4 towns in the western half of the western division, I would get a point against me for each of those. Basically, the reason for that is to basically get the dispatcher to want to get these trains moving without waiting until later in the game when all the scheduled trains have finished running. But basically, the goal is for playing this is to get as few points or deduction or demerits against you as possible. Points to count against you is when a train can't make its full move, and then plus any trains that are still in the original terminals. Earlier I had mentioned about collisions. Basically, if I had a westbound train and I crossed it over from this left-hand track onto the bottom track here, or from track 5 to 6 here at BK, he's not going to have signals going westbound because the signals are pointing for eastbound traffic. So the eastbound traffic would stop, but he wouldn't have any signals. As a result, as soon as you take your hand off that piece and he's committed to that line, he's not going to have a signal to warn him that there's a train on that track and there's going to be a collision. And anytime you cause a collision like that, that line is taken out of service for the rest of the game, and you also incur 50 points against you. So basically, you have to be careful about what track you're routing trains on, and trying to avoid delays and everything like that. So it's very realistic in regards to railroad operations. They've basically simplified it, of course, for gameplay, but it's fairly realistic. Someone I know mentioned when I first heard about this game online, people were saying that train dispatchers aren't really competing against each other; they're working together. And there's actually, saw as I was going through the rule book, there's actually a rule in there where if, say, I have a passenger train coming from Avalon, and it's coming down to PA Tower, and it's crossing over into the Eastern Territory. If I'm crossing over into the Eastern Territory and I can't move that train the required 4 spaces because my opponent has trains blocked up here east of the division line, basically the dispatcher that incurs the delay is the one who is going to get penalized. So if I can't move into the Eastern division because my opponent has the tracks blocked with other trains, because the other opponent has the tracks blocked, they are the ones that are going to get the demerits, not the person who can't move their train. So basically the rules are set up to prevent opponents from going and intentionally trying to sabotage the other player. Basically the way the whole goal of the game is basically run your division as efficiently as possible, and basically when the game's over is when you find out if you've got more demerits than your opponent or not. And of course whoever has less points, it's basically like scoring in golf. The less points you have, the better score you've got. So, but that is Dispatcher, and so we're now going to go ahead and move on and take a look at C&O B&O. Alright, so this is C&O B&O. Like Dispatcher, I found this on eBay. This one I actually found for $30, which for this one's from 1969. The Dispatcher, of course, is from 1958. The box, as you can see, is in really good shape for being 52 years old. There's a little tear up here that I put a little tape on to keep it from tearing any worse. But other than that, the box is in really good shape. Go ahead and open it up here. And the box is set up almost like it's you can put it like on a bookshelf with books or something. Go ahead and set the box aside. And so it's supposed to have two of these clips that are for holding the board together, but tightly as this would be holding the board together, I don't want to use this. There's only one of these anyway, but I don't want to go ahead and use this on the board because I'm afraid the corners would tear into the board or something and leave marks or something, which I'm trying to keep everything as new as possible. So the original plastic bag parts came in, then a replacement part envelope. You got train markers or load markers, white and black, which we'll go into in a moment. Basically these are positioned around the board for players to pick up throughout the gameplay with their freight trains. You have the dispatcher's manual, which has information on the dispatching moves through the in the game. It also goes into history of both the Chesapeake and Ohio and the Baltimore and Ohio. Then you have the main instructions for the gameplay. You got the train markers. There are 50 for the Baltimore and Ohio and 47 for the Chesapeake and Ohio. I've got those divided up between both railroads as well as east and westbound movements. You have 24 situation cards, which are a little different than the situation cards for the dispatcher game, but we'll go over those in a moment too. Another survey on the game, postcard that you can mail in. This is the original cardboard insert, which when I opened up the box, basically about half of the train markers are still on this cardboard sheet. They hadn't even been removed. That's how new of condition this game was in when I got it. You also have timetables for both the Baltimore and Ohio in the blue and the Chesapeake and Ohio in the yellow. On the back they have, when you start the game at 12 noon, basically where the trains are going that are out on the route are going to be initially located. You have the score sheets for each dispatcher, yellow for Chesapeake and Ohio, blue for Baltimore and Ohio, and it tells on each hour then, or for each turn, basically what trains you're going to be, scheduled trains you're going to be sending out onto the main line for their runs. And then of course it has a score sheet, kind of like in bowling. Basically top left corners for points for that round, then bottom right is for the total points so far for the game. Kind of like when the score sheet for a bowling match. But this actually had some markings in pencil on some of these spaces up here. I went ahead and erased those. But other than that, and a little bit of light wear on the board, instructions have a little bit of wear at the bottom, or wrinkle at the bottom, like something tangled with it. But other than that, those are all new. And then of course we have the two halves of the game board, which I'll go ahead and get set up. So this is C&O B&O. All set up with train markers in all their locations for points of origin. The board is loosely based on the map, what would be an actual map of the two railroads, the Baltimore, Ohio in the blue, and Chesapeake, Ohio in the yellow. stretching westbound from Washington and Newport News, across Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, and into Ohio, woohoo, and Michigan, Indiana, Missouri, and Kentucky. Like I said, it's loosely based on the actual maps because obviously to include every single mile of trackage into a game like this would be extremely complicated, and it would deter from the actual gameplay. One thing you might be noticing is when you're looking at the game that some stuff is upside down on the board as you look at. We're actually looking at right now on this side from the Chesapeake and Ohio player's side, and then over here is the view from the Baltimore and Ohio player's side. So basically the main text on the board is right side up depending on which player you're playing. For example, we'll choose Parkersburg. To the C&O side it would be upside down, but to the B&O side it's right side up. So basically that's how the game's played. Also, obviously, westbound for the C&O is to the left, eastbound is to the right, whereas with the B&O, eastbound is to the left and westbound is to the right. So it's a little opposite for both sides. Pretty well detailed. I'm kind of impressed with all the towns that they've got listed. Even right here between Willard and Fostoria, they have a little town of Tiffin, Ohio even listed, which is where I went to college at Heidelberg, so it's kind of impressive they included little tiny towns like that. So basically the way the game is played is players move, like a dispatcher, they move the trains across the board, and basically points are scored by on-time train arrivals as well as how many loads you pick up along the way, which we'll go into here in a moment. So there are 6 different types of trains on the board. The top row is the 3 types for the Baltimore and Ohio trains, and the bottom row is the Chesapeake and Ohio trains. The left column 2 trains for both rows, those are the limited passenger trains. Those are the passenger trains that don't stop at every little station along the route. The middle 2 of each row are the local passenger trains. And those are the ones that do stop at every station along the route, and that's important for the gameplay, which I'll describe here in a moment. And then the right 2, or the right marker for each row, is the freight trains for B&O on top, of course, and C&O on the bottom. As you look at the train markers, the train number is in the arrow at the one end of the marker. So that top row has 2 westbounds going to the left and then eastbound going to the right. That has the train numbers in them. And then the left hand are basically the initials farthest from the train number is the origin of the train. So RU would be Russell, Kentucky, or Ashland, Kentucky, for ASH and so on. And then the town next to, or the initials next to the train marker, is where it's heading to. So the right 2, or top row, would be Russell, Kentucky to Toledo, Russell, Kentucky to Louisville, and then Russell, Kentucky to Washington, D.C. On the passenger trains, you sometimes have initials in the middle that aren't in bold. Those are the layover towns where the passenger trains are going to be stopping, and they're going to be stopped there until a certain time, and then they are allowed to leave. Because some towns, trains would have layovers, passenger trains would have layovers, and of course you cannot leave before your scheduled time on those towns. Like a dispatcher, the routes are divided into sections. Basically, passenger trains are allowed to move 3 spaces per section per turn, and with the limited passenger trains, and this is where the local and limited trains get are differentiated. The limited trains stop only for the black bars separating the spaces. So if you see a white space, say right here, where that white space is, that would actually be 1 space counted for the limited passenger train. So if it's coming from the right, it would from that little town there, because these white spaces or white dashes are not counted as a stop for the limited trains. It would go 1, 2, 3 spaces, basically stopping on that curve there. So, whereas the local passengers be going 1, 2, and then 3, and stopping way back there. So, the limiteds would be going a lot faster, of course, faster schedules than the local passenger trains. Meanwhile, your freight trains, they are only allowed to move 2 spaces per turn. So, like in dispatcher, trains have different. Higher priority trains have are allowed to move more spaces than the lower priority trains. So, like dispatcher, there's also situation cards for B&O C&O, which basically describe situations on the route. And in addition to that, it tells where to place load markers for freight trains to pick up load markers. Those get placed at specific places along the routes. Basically, if you pick up if there's a load on your route, you want one of your freight trains to pick it up. There's 3 spots in Indiana, Pine Junction, Indiana, Fostoria, and then where did it go? Chillicothe, where the towns are served by both railroads. As a result, either railroad can pick up load markers from there. There's 2 colors, white for westbound, well, white and black. You can basically choose whichever color you want to have represent westbound or eastbound loads. For me, white starting with W, I'm going to be using those for westbounds, and then black for eastbounds. Just make it a little easier to remember. Also, on the situation cards, you'll notice that these are numbered. 2 ways you can use the situation cards here is either shuffle them up and use them, turn them over randomly, or you can put them in numbered sequence, and it basically changes the gameplay for making the loads some more towards later in the gameplay. So typical gameplay for C&O B&O for each round. Basically, on the timetables, there are on the back, the game starts, whereas dispatcher start at 8 a.m., C&O B&O starts at 12 noon, and basically has instructions for both dispatchers for where to place trains en route along the route, because obviously this is a real railroad, which means that there's not going to be no trains at all anywhere along the route at a specific time. So there's always going to be trains moving. So basically, the dispatchers move their specific trains out onto the board to get started. And then what happens is situation card gets turned over, wherever that applies to, like on the dispatcher game. Players take note of that. And then load markers get placed if there are any load markers getting placed on the board. And then any game, basically like in dispatcher, whoever's going first moves their trains that are en route on their territory, and then they look at the schedule, find out what's scheduled to be to depart from the different stations along the route, and move those out onto the main line accordingly. And then that's when you would choose to, whether or not you're going to move your freight trains. Freight trains are moved as extras. They are not on any schedule. Thing is, you don't want to move them too soon, because the reason for that is the way the point system works. Basically, unlike dispatcher, where you get demerits or points against you when you can't move a train a certain number of spaces, with C&O, B&O, you actually want to get points for basically your passenger trains arriving on time. I believe it's 5 points for every on-time arrival. And then for your freight trains, for every load that marker that you pick up, as you're going along and you stop in a town that has a load marker waiting for you, when you pick that up, that's 5 points that you pick up. And then once you're done with your turn, if there are any load markers along your route that you have not picked up, you get 2 points deducted from your score. So basically, unlike unlike dispatcher, where you're wanting to have a low score, in C&O, B&O you want to have a high score. So that's a little opposite from the other game. Also with C&O, B&O, while the game doesn't have a helper district like on dispatcher, one thing that does happen is that some of the passenger trains will run combined, and then when they get to the layover points, they actually separate into sections. So you'll have a couple markers stacked on top of each other going across for like the Capital Limited. When it gets to Cumberland, and when it's on layover there, the bottom marker gets left behind as the train takes off, and then that marker becomes a separate passenger train or section that goes on the route that goes down across through Parkersburg and Chillicothe and Cincinnati and St. Louis. Then the other passenger or other main section continues on to Willard, which then splits off another section, and then continues on to Chicago with the other section going on, I believe, to Toledo. This is kind of similar to what's currently in use by Amtrak on the Lakeshore Limited, where the train splits in upstate New York, with one section going to Boston and then the other one going down to New York City. And then likewise the two sections come together as their trains are going westbound. So to compare the two games, Dispatcher has a realistic track layout of a fictional railroad, whereas C&O B&O has a simplified map of two real railroads that existed when it was created. Dispatcher has 84 trains of 3 different classes that are run on the railroad, which would be a realistic number of trains for on a real railroad that would be run within a 24-hour period. C&O B&O has 97 train markers, 50 westbound Baltimore and Ohio, 50 eastbound westbound Baltimore and Ohio, and then 23 and 24 eastbound westbounds for the Chesapeake and Ohio. Obviously, being a simplified map of the railroads, obviously like how they can't include every single route mile of both railroads. Obviously, if they included all the trains, it would be way too complicated as well. So C&O B&O is pretty simplified of both railroads, but still, it's based off of a real railroad, whereas Dispatcher is a fictional railroad. With Dispatcher, the game starts at 8 a.m. with no trains on the board. Everything is still in the origin yards. And then the C&O B&O, that game starts with trains en route along the different routes of the railroads. With Dispatcher, points are scored like in golf, where you're scored basically on train delays, en route, as well as any trains that you haven't moved out. With C&O B&O, you're scored, you want actually to get a higher score than your opponent, where basically you get points for on-time arrivals of your trains, as well as loads that you've picked up, and getting points deducted for any loads that you haven't picked up. With Dispatcher, the actual competition, there's really no actual competition other than you're basically trying to outperform your opponent in efficiency with regards to moving trains across your division. Whereas in C&O B&O, it is like in real life, where you have two competing railroads competing to get their trains to their destinations on time, as well as to get the most freight loads picked up for providing service along their routes. So that is Dispatcher and C&O B&O, two very well made board games in my opinion. Like I said, I did play Dispatcher already. The issue I had was I forgot some of the rules as I was playing. I kind of rushed to play the game, see how it played out and everything. So I was accidentally, when I was moving trains across the division point, by one player, the next player was moving them as well, and so forth. So, and plus I forgot about about counting the freight trains that are in the staging yards and everything. So that kind of messed up the scoring a little bit. But this is my first time playing it. It is a game where you want to take your time, you want to learn the board and the rules and everything before you just dive in and start playing. I do have a little cheat sheet I made of the rules to kind of help guide me next time I play it, to go through each round for basically what to check on each round and everything. C&O B&O, I haven't had a chance to play that yet. I want to play it where both games give the option for solo play, where you can play it one person. C&O B&O, you can play it with just one railroad, or the way I would want to try it is with both railroads. Problem is, as you saw when I was showing the board, it helps to be on one side or the other, and right now with obviously trees in the way with Christmas coming up, so I don't have a lot of room to keep switching sides to side in here on this board, and this is unfortunately the only place I have to set up the card table with a board game on it, because otherwise the cats will get into it, and I want to try to keep these games as nice and neat as I can without the cats messing things up, which I guarantee they would get into this stuff, especially all these little markers. They get into this no problem at all. So both games also have an accelerated play that you can do, where basically it's a shortened version of the game for like if you don't have a couple hours or so to play it. And then there's also extended play that you can do, because basically once the trains reach their destination, you can move the markers back to the original yards or points where they originated from, and just keep playing. So when you get, for C&O B&O, starts at 12 noon. When you get to 12 noon for the next day, which would be normally the end of the game, you can go ahead and start in with the trains again, because basically the trains that were on the board when you started, they would be moving out from their destinations already. So same way with the dispatcher game. You can move the game pieces back. You'd have freight trains out here, but the scheduled trains would be back at their original destination and ready to start for the next day as well. One of the things when moving the trains that can get a little complicated is keeping track of which trains you've moved and everything. For both games, I went ahead and I actually made an Excel spreadsheet of all the train numbers and everything for each game. One's a spreadsheet for the C-No B-No game, one for the dispatcher, and basically I'm going to use that for keeping track of, checking off what trains are on the board, and then, I can check off for each round, which train has been moved, which train hasn't been moved. When I first played it, the dispatcher game, the way I was keeping track of what I'd moved and what trains I hadn't moved, I actually used my cell phone, snapped a picture of the board at the end of each round, and then I knew when I was moving trains in the next round which trains hadn't moved, or had been moved, or hadn't been moved. The other thing too, I was using a small notebook for my scoring, and it helps to have a little bit more room than that. You can also use like Notepad or something on a tablet or your computer too to keep track. But the other day I was at Meijer and I just picked up a couple of cheap $1.50 notebooks to give me some like writing room or scribble room to make notes of what was my scoring and everything, and keep track of everything. The dispatcher game does not come with any kind of way of keeping track of scoring, so basically you're on your own with that. C-No B-No has the scorecards for the two dispatchers. Like I said though, I'm wanting to try to keep everything as new as possible, so basically what I did with the C-No B-No was I scanned the scorecards. I only included 4 columns for 4 games, and then I'm going to use pencil to basically wipe the board or when I need to or anything. But basically I scanned that and printed those off so that way I can have my own scorecards to write on and not have to worry about, writing on the ones that came with the game. So anyways, that's 2 games. It's really good games. As you know, I love board games. And of course, 2 games based on railroading are right up my alley, so very well designed, well thought out. Obviously it's railroading in real life is a lot more complicated than what they put into these games, but for simplifying it down to where it's a nice little strategy game. You have to think out ahead of time, what you're going to how you're going to move your trains and stuff, so you don't block, obviously block the higher priority trains and everything like that. But yet you want to also keep things moving, and with C-No B-No you're literally are competing with the other railroad in terms of trying to get stuff moving on time and everything. So both good games, and I'm really amazed too that I was able to find these in as good condition as I was able to find them. Dispatcher from 1958, that's a 63-year-old game. C-No B-No, that's a 52-year-old game, and finding them in this good condition, I was just, when I got these in the mail and I opened them up, I was just totally amazed at how good condition they are. Because based on the description in the eBay ads, advertisements, they were talking about wear and tear and everything, and these are in remarkably good condition for their ages. So obviously I take care of what I own, so they're going to be lasting me a while. So anyways, that's Dispatcher and See No Be No. Hope you've enjoyed this board game review. See what happens with other games if I've got in my collection, if I do any more board game reviews. But Dispatcher and See No Be No, Avalon Hill, you guys made a good game. Wish you guys still made it. There are these new younger game players to these games. So thanks for watching, folks. See you in the next video.